Hi. My name is Samantha Julia, and I've learned that sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who hand you the keys to their own downfall. On the night of my birthday, I wasn't given cake, I wasn't handed balloons or even a smile. I was handed humiliation by the CEO's son, the man who thought mocking me in front of an entire crowd would somehow make him powerful. He laughed, they clapped, and I stood there, trying not to let my hands shake as the sting cut deep. But here's the part he didn't know, the part that would keep him awake at night if he had only seen the look in my eyes. I already had the perfect gift waiting for him. And it wasn't wrapped in a bow. It was sharp, silent, and ready to strike when the moment was right. I kept my head down that night, but in my mind, the countdown had already begun. Before I take you into the twists and betrayals that followed, I want to welcome you here. If you love stories of revenge, betrayal, and poetic justice, then you're in the right place. This is more than entertainment, it's a reminder that being underestimated can become your greatest weapon. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, you don't want to miss the stories we tell here. And drop your location in the comments below. I love seeing where my storytellers are tuning in from, whether you're watching from Atlanta, Paris, London, or a small town no one has ever heard of. And tell me, has anyone ever underestimated you? Because if they have, you're going to feel this one. I used to believe birthdays were supposed to be simple moments of joy. A cake, a few laughs, maybe some off-key singing from coworkers who barely knew the words. Nothing spectacular, just a reminder that you mattered enough to be remembered. But that year, on my 29th birthday, I learned that sometimes the people around you don't hand you cake, they hand you fire. The office had been buzzing all day. I could feel the shift in the air even though they tried to keep it a secret. My coworkers had been whispering, ducking into corners with little smirks and nudges, glancing at me when they thought I wasn't looking. It was sweet, really. I wasn't the type to demand attention, but they wanted to do something nice. After all, I'd been the one holding the team together for years, the one making sure reports were filed, schedules aligned, and deadlines never slipped through the cracks. By late afternoon, I got called into the conference room. The lights were dimmed, and when the switch flipped on, the room exploded with a chorus of surprise. The table was covered with paper plates, balloons taped to the wall, and a cake that had my name scrawled in bright frosting, "Happy birthday, Samantha." For a moment, I forgot everything else. I laughed, I blushed, I let myself feel seen. They sang, off-key and loud, their voices echoing against the walls. I stood in front of the cake, the candles flickering, wax dripping down faster than I could gather my wish. For a split second, it felt like I was surrounded by family instead of coworkers. Their smiles weren't forced, they genuinely wanted me to have this moment. And as I leaned closer to blow out the candles, I thought to myself, this is nice. Maybe I belong here after all. But then the door opened. His entrance wasn't subtle, it never was. The CEO's son, Daniel Carter. Entitled wasn't a strong enough word for him. He carried himself like the world was his stage and we were all unpaid extras. Slicked back hair, designer shoes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and that smirk, oh, that smirk could curdle milk. The room shifted instantly. Conversations hushed, laughter died, and my birthday surprise froze mid-celebration. Daniel always had that effect. People either laughed at his jokes to stay on his good side, or kept their heads down, praying not to become his target. He looked at the cake, then at me, and tilted his head with mock disbelief. Well, he drawled, loud enough for everyone to hear. Look at this. A party, for the secretary. The word sliced through the air. Secretary. I wasn't a secretary. My title was executive assistant, but more importantly, I was the glue holding this company together. I managed operations, smoothed client relationships, handled crises Daniel didn't even know existed. But to him, reducing me to just a secretary was the easiest way to strip me of dignity. The room chuckled, nervous laughter bubbling from throats that didn't want trouble. My coworkers didn't mean harm, but fear made them complicit. Daniel stepped closer, circling like a shark smelling blood. Overpaid, too, he continued, plucking a balloon string and letting it slip from his fingers. I mean, do we really need someone to fetch coffee and file papers at this salary? Dad's got a soft spot for charity cases, I guess. My chest tightened. Heat rose up my neck, and I prayed no one could see the tears forming in my eyes. His words weren't just insults, they were weapons, crafted to humiliate. Someone tried to change the subject, nervously clapping. Come on, Daniel, it's just a birthday. But he cut them off. No, let's be real. Let's not pretend this is some rising star in the company. She's replaceable. That's the word. Replaceable. That word. It lodged itself in my heart like a thorn. Replaceable. After years of late nights, covering for mistakes he never even knew happened, sacrificing weekends to make sure projects went smoothly, I was nothing but replaceable. They laughed again, weaker this time, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. The candles flickered, forgotten, the frosting on the cake starting to melt. No one sang now. No one cheered. The room had shifted into his theater, and I was the unwilling lead in his cruel performance. I managed a small smile, though my hands trembled at my sides. Thank you, Daniel, I whispered, but my voice was barely audible. I blew out the candles quickly, not making a wish, because the only thing I wanted in that moment was to disappear. The applause was awkward, stilted, a mercy clap to fill the silence. People grabbed cake slices, avoiding my eyes. No one wanted to be caught on my side. And I couldn't blame them, standing against Daniel meant standing against the CEO's son. And who in their right mind would risk that? That night, I went home with a slice of cake and a paper napkin, untouched in my bag. I locked the door, kicked off my heels, and finally let the tears fall. They burned hot against my cheeks as I sat on my couch in the dim glow of the lamp. I replayed every word in my head, secretary. Overpaid. Replaceable. Each one dug deeper, reminding me of where I stood in his eyes, at the bottom. And maybe in the eyes of everyone else too. But then, something unexpected happened. Beneath the tears, beneath the humiliation, a different emotion began to stir. Anger. No, more than anger, fire. A steady, unshakable fire that spread through my chest, drying my tears and hardening my resolve. That was the day I made myself a promise. If Daniel Carter wanted a war, he was going to get one. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew this, his arrogance had just handed me the fuel I needed. And when the time came, I wasn't going to strike fast. I was going to strike smart. Because little did he know, his arrogance wasn't just a moment of cruelty. It was the match that lit my fuse. And once lit, there was no turning back. They say revenge is best served cold. But I learned something different, revenge is best served patient. The weeks after my birthday humiliation felt like walking on glass. Every time I stepped into the office, I braced myself. Daniel Carter seemed to take a sick pleasure in seeking me out. If I was quiet in a meeting, he'd point it out. If I offered a suggestion, he'd smirk and roll his eyes. Sometimes, he didn't even need words. One raised eyebrow, one mocking laugh from across the room, and I felt the sting. But I didn't crumble. Not this time. Because while he was busy flaunting his arrogance, I was beginning to notice things. It started one Thursday night. The office was nearly empty, the kind of quiet where you can hear the hum of the air conditioner and the clicking of your own keyboard echoing in the dark. I stayed late often, partly because I had too much work, partly because being home alone with my thoughts was worse. I was sorting through a batch of invoices for vendor payments when I noticed something strange. A vendor name I didn't recognize, Larkspur Consulting. That wouldn't have raised alarms by itself, companies worked with dozens of outside firms. But the address field caught my attention. No suite number, no office floor, just a vague P.O. box. I frowned and pulled up the records. Payment after payment, all approved, all signed off with Daniel's digital authorization. Large sums, too. We're not talking about a few $100s for office supplies. No, these were tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds, dripping out every month. At first, I thought maybe it was legitimate. But then I checked the contact number listed. Disconnected. The email domain? Generic. Something about it didn't sit right. So I dug deeper. By the second hour, I had 3 other vendor accounts pulled up: Silverpine Solutions, Westbrook Strategies, and Orchid Advisors. All of them with the same patterns: vague addresses, no clear business records, no employees I could trace. Just empty shells that money kept pouring into. And every single one linked back to Daniel's sign-off. That's when it hit me. He wasn't just arrogant. He wasn't just cruel. He was stealing millions. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo down the empty halls. I whispered it aloud just to steady myself: he's committing fraud. It was so simple, and yet so devastating. Think of it like charging a company card for a dinner that never happened, only multiply that by millions, spread it across ghost companies, and hide it under layers of fake paperwork. I closed my eyes, my mind racing. If this was true, if Daniel was funneling company money into his own pockets, then everything he'd ever thrown in my face wasn't just arrogance. It was projection. He was the parasite. He was the fraud. But I didn't act. Not yet. The easy thing would have been to storm into the CEO's office the next morning and drop the evidence. But easy doesn't win wars. Easy doesn't destroy men like Daniel Carter. If I wanted justice, no, if I wanted revenge, I needed more. I needed proof so airtight it would choke him. So I gathered. Night after night, I stayed late. I combed through financial records, downloaded backups, organized files and hidden folders on a USB drive I wore around my neck like a talisman. I traced transfers, cross-referenced vendor accounts, pieced together the puzzle he thought no one would ever notice. And during the day? I endured. Every insult, every jab, every smug comment, I swallowed them whole. He thought he was breaking me down, but he was wrong. Every time he called me overpaid, I smiled politely. Every time he dismissed me as replaceable, I nodded. Because inside, I was building something much bigger than my pride. I was building the rope he'd hang himself with. One afternoon in particular still lingers in my memory. A meeting with the entire executive board. Daniel strutted in late, as usual, tossing his jacket onto a chair like he owned the room. The CEO, his father, cleared his throat but didn't scold him. Nobody ever did. When I presented the quarterly reports I had painstakingly prepared, Daniel interrupted halfway through, smirking. "Thanks, Samantha, but let's not bore the room with spreadsheets. We all know the big picture is fine." Laughter. Always that cursed laughter. I forced a smile, my nails digging into the folder in front of me. Because while he thought those numbers were boring, I knew they were his downfall. Every page I flipped held a breadcrumb leading straight to his schemes. And still, I waited. Patience is a strange thing. It eats at you from the inside, gnaws at your nerves, makes you second-guess whether the moment will ever come. But it also sharpens you. Every insult became another reason to keep going. Every jab was another nail in the coffin I was quietly building. By the end of the second month, I had enough evidence to sink him 10 times over. Bank transfers, fake invoices, shell companies registered under proxies that all tied back to his circle of friends, it was all there. But still, I didn't strike. Because I realized something even more delicious than exposing him. I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to keep laughing, keep strutting, keep humiliating me in front of others. I wanted him to believe I was powerless, because when the trap finally snapped shut, the shock on his face would be worth every sleepless night. So I played my role. Quiet. Obedient. Invisible. And Daniel? He never saw it coming. That night, after another long session of combing through documents, I sat back and looked at my growing pile of evidence. My lamp cast a small circle of light over the table, illuminating the USB drive resting against my skin. I touched it, feeling the weight of it, the power of it. I whispered to myself, a promise, a vow. This is the rope. And when the time comes, he'll be the one tightening the noose. And for the first time since my birthday humiliation, I smiled, not politely, not forced, but a true, cold smile. Because the game had shifted. The prey had become the hunter. And Daniel Carter's days of mocking me were numbered. I had the rope. But ropes don't tighten themselves. You need a hand steady enough to pull, and patient enough to wait until the perfect moment. The evidence I'd collected was powerful, yes. But I knew Daniel Carter wasn't just a spoiled son with sticky fingers. He was shielded. Protected. The CEO's darling boy. If I walked into the boardroom tomorrow and dropped my files on the table, they'd laugh me out of the building. Worse, Daniel would find a way to bury me, twist the narrative until I was the criminal. I couldn't fight him alone. That realization settled heavy in my chest one night as I sat at my desk long after everyone had gone home. My lamp lit the mountain of files spread before me, but even with proof stacked so high it could block the light, I felt the isolation. The walls were thin, but the silence was suffocating. No, I needed someone else. Someone who hated him enough to take the risk. Someone with the skills to back me up. That's when my mind landed on Ethan Hayes. Ethan was a junior accountant, tucked away in the far corner of the finance department. Soft-spoken, precise, and always the last to leave. People dismissed him as invisible, which was exactly why I trusted him. He had no interest in office politics, no hunger for the spotlight. But I'd seen his eyes harden more than once when Daniel strutted through the floor, barking orders. I approached him cautiously. One evening, after most had left, I walked past his desk. I approached him cautiously. One evening, after most had left, I walked past his desk. He was still there, glasses slipping down his nose, his screen filled with spreadsheets. "Ethan," I said softly. He startled, adjusting his glasses. "Oh. Samantha. Still here?" "Always," I replied with a dry smile. Then, lowering my voice, "Can we talk?" "Somewhere private." Suspicion flickered in his eyes, but curiosity won. We ended up in the deserted break room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "What's this about?" he asked, crossing his arms. I took a breath, then slid a file across the table. "It's about Daniel Carter." His brow furrowed as he opened the folder. At first, he skimmed, uninterested, but then his eyes sharpened. He flipped a page, then another. By the fourth page, his lips parted in disbelief. "Are you?" He lowered his voice. "These vendors, they're fake." I nodded. "Every single one." "And the money?" Funneled right back to him. He stared at me, glasses catching the harsh light. "Samantha, if this blows back, it could ruin me," I finished for him. My tone was calm, steady. "Yes. It could. It could ruin you, too." His silence stretched. Then, finally, he asked, "And what happens if we win?" That was when I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "Then we both burn. But I promise you, he'll burn hotter." From that night, we were co-conspirators. Ethan brought the numbers, the language of fraud. He explained where the shells were weakest, where transfers overlapped, where the digital paper trail left smudges even Daniel hadn't noticed. I brought the evidence I'd gathered, organizing it, layering it, building a fortress of proof. We met after hours, always in different places. Sometimes the break room. Sometimes the records archive. Once, even in the underground parking garage, huddled over a laptop balanced on the hood of my car. Every time, Ethan looked more anxious, but more determined. "This is insane," he muttered once, his hands trembling as he scrolled through fraudulent transfers. "If they trace us." "They won't," I said. "We're ghosts." "But even ghosts can be caught." The close calls started piling up. One evening, I was printing off a batch of flagged invoices when the machine jammed. I cursed under my breath, trying to pry the paper loose, when I heard footsteps. Heavy, confident. The kind of stride that made my stomach twist. Daniel. I yanked the paper free just as he rounded the corner. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might leap out of my chest. I shoved the printouts under a stack of generic reports and forced a casual smile. Working late again, he smirked, leaning against the doorframe. Someone has to keep the wheels turning, I replied lightly, praying he wouldn't look closer. He didn't. He just laughed, clapped me on the shoulder with that patronizing force, and sauntered away. When he was gone, I pulled the papers from under the pile. Smudged with toner, still warm. My hand shook, but I smiled. Another bullet dodged. Another reminder that the game was dangerous, but worth it. Another night, Ethan and I were deep in the archive room, cross-referencing paper records against digital files. The air was musty, the fluorescent bulb flickering. Suddenly, the door handle rattled. We froze. The door creaked open, and for a split second I imagined Daniel's smug face catching us red-handed. But it was only Janice, the night cleaner, pushing her cart inside. Oh. Sorry, she said, blinking at us. Didn't know anyone was still here. I forced a laugh, waving the folder in my hand. Just trying to track down a missing report. Janice shrugged, uninterested, and left. Ethan collapsed into a chair once the door shut. My heart's going to give out before we finish this, he whispered. Good, I said with a thin smile. Fear keeps us sharp. Piece by piece, we tightened the noose. We traced shell companies to offshore accounts, then back to trusts linked under false names. Ethan used his access to flag suspicious transfers, while I built timelines that showed how Daniel's fraud coincided with budget cuts, layoffs, and unexpected losses that had left hundreds of employees struggling. Every insult Daniel had ever thrown at me echoed as fuel while I worked. Overpaid assistant. Replaceable. His words became ghosts that haunted my nights, pushing me harder, keeping me awake when exhaustion clawed at my eyes. And yet, through the fear and fatigue, a strange calm settled over me. This was more than revenge now. This was justice wrapped in fire. But Daniel was circling, too. One afternoon, he barged into my office unannounced. I had documents open on my computer, files that would damn him if he glanced too closely. Busy, he drawled, flopping into the chair across from me. I clicked the screen closed, heart racing. Always. He studied me, his smirk curling. You've been awfully quiet lately. Not like you. Should I be worried? I forced a small laugh. Worried? About me? Hardly. His eyes narrowed, searching my face. Then, with a shrug, he stood. Good. Keep it that way. When he left, I realized how close I'd come. One slip, one misplaced file, and everything would collapse. But the closer the danger, the sharper my resolve. The weeks blurred. Late nights, secret meetings, whispered plans. Ethan and I became shadows in our own workplace. We didn't just gather evidence, we curated it, crafting a narrative so undeniable that even the most loyal board member couldn't look away. One night, as Ethan reviewed the final stack of evidence, he looked up at me with something like awe. This isn't just a case, he said. This is a guillotine. I met his gaze, cold and steady. Good. Because Daniel Carter won't just trip. He'll fall, and when he does, the blade will already be waiting. By the end of the third month, the case was airtight. Every account, every fraudulent invoice, every dollar stolen, mapped, traced, recorded. And yet I didn't move. Not yet. Because I wanted more than justice. I wanted spectacle. I wanted Daniel to walk into his own execution blindfolded, thinking it was another day of triumph. And then, at the peak of his arrogance, I wanted the floor ripped out from under him. That night, as I stood in the empty boardroom, looking out over the city lights, I whispered the truth to myself. The day of reckoning isn't far. And he has no idea, he's already sent me the invitation. Birthdays are supposed to be about candles and cake, about people raising their glasses and toasting to another year of life. But this year, my birthday was about something else entirely. It was about death, not of a person, but of a legacy, of a smug prince's illusion of power. The company gala was scheduled 2 days before my birthday, but the irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. I already knew what present I was giving myself. The venue sparkled that night. Chandeliers dripping with crystal light, a string quartet humming in the corner, waiters gliding through the crowd with trays of champagne. Every executive, every board member, every whispering investor was there. And at the center of it all was Daniel Carter, basking in the glow of his father's empire like a man who believed the crown was already on his head. I walked in quietly, a black dress simple but sharp, my hair pinned back with surgical precision. I wasn't there to dazzle. I was there to deliver. From across the room, I felt his eyes find me. Daniel's smirk spread like oil on water. He cut through the crowd, his champagne glass dangling from 2 fingers, his arrogance filling the space before he even reached me. Well, if it isn't the ever-loyal Samantha, he drawled, his voice dripping with contempt. Tell me, do you ever get tired of carrying other people's baggage? A few nearby executives chuckled awkwardly, their discomfort masked as amusement. Then, with perfect cruelty, he added, though, I suppose you're better at carrying trays than carrying titles. The laugh that followed was his alone, loud and sharp. I smiled. Polite. Controlled. Because what he didn't know was that he'd just handed me the perfect opening. I set down my glass. Daniel, I said evenly, if you don't mind, I'd like a moment to speak. Something in my tone made the laughter die. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. Even the string quartet seemed to falter, the bow of the violinist hanging a beat too long in the air. Daniel blinked, surprised, then grinned. By all means. The floor is yours. Enlighten us. He thought I was about to embarrass myself. He thought I was about to stumble, to crumble under the pressure. He thought wrong. I stepped into the center of the room. My heels clicked against the polished floor, a metronome counting down the seconds of his reign. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice calm but clear, slicing through the silence. We gathered tonight to celebrate the continued success of this company. To toast to its future. But what kind of future can we have when corruption is eating us alive from within? A ripple moved through the crowd. Brows furrowed. Hands shifted uncomfortably on glasses. I opened the folder I had carried with me. Crisp documents, neatly tabbed. These are vendor invoices approved under Daniel Carter's authority. I held one up, the bold letterhead gleaming under the light. On paper, they look legitimate. But if you cross-reference them against company records, I lifted another sheet, you'll find they don't exist. The vendors are fabricated. Shells. Gasps. Murmurs. The air shifted, heavy with suspicion. I continued, unwavering. Funds were funneled into personal accounts. Millions. Stolen under your noses. And the man responsible, I turned, locking eyes with Daniel, his smirk faltering for the first time all night, stands right here. The silence was deafening. I could feel the room holding its breath. Daniel laughed. A brittle, desperate sound. This is absurd. Baseless accusations from a bitter assistant. But I wasn't finished. I pulled another document from the folder. Here is the transfer trail. I laid it flat on the nearest table, the numbers glaring in black and white. Here are the forged signatures. And here, I held up one final sheet, his own scrawl unmistakable, is Daniel Carter's authorization. The first gasp cut through the air. Then another. Then a dozen. Heads swiveled. Eyes narrowed. And the CEO himself, Mr. Carter, stared at the paper as though it had turned to flame in his hands. His face drained of color. Daniel, his voice cracked, low, broken. Daniel lunged toward me, trying to snatch the documents. Lies. She faked this. But I stepped back, calm as stone. Even if you burned these, it wouldn't matter. Copies have already been filed with regulators. With law enforcement. With legal counsel. There is no covering this up. Not now. Not ever. The words landed like thunder. The crowd erupted into a storm of whispers. Executives muttered, investors pulled out their phones, board members looked at one another with dawning horror. And Daniel's confidence cracked. His face twisted, the mask of smug superiority slipping into raw panic. You can't do this to me, he hissed, voice trembling. Do you know who I am? I looked him in the eye, calm, steady. Yes. And now they do, too. Mr. Carter rose slowly, his glass clinking against the table as he set it down with trembling hands. His voice, when it came, was not the booming authority of a CEO. It was the hollow rasp of a father betrayed. Daniel, he said, you have disgraced this company. You have disgraced me. Daniel shook his head violently. No, Dad, listen, she's lying. But the room had already decided. The tide had turned. Mr. Carter looked to security, his face pale, his jaw tight. Escort him out. The guard stepped forward. Daniel thrashed, his voice cracking into desperation. No. This is my company. Mine. His eyes darted wildly, landing on me with a venom that couldn't hide the fear. You'll pay for this, Samantha. I swear. The guards grabbed his arms, dragging him toward the exit as his words dissolved into incoherent rage. And then, just like that, he was gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dozens of eyes turned to me, some wide with shock, others narrowed with new respect, a few brimming with fear. But I didn't bask in it. I didn't smile. I only gathered my papers, calm and composed, and returned them to the folder. Because this wasn't about applause. This was about survival. About justice. About the rope finally pulling taut. I lifted my glass once more, the champagne fizzing softly as though nothing had happened. The same day he tried to erase me, I said quietly, my voice carrying through the stunned silence, I erased him instead. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the story wasn't over. Not yet. I arrived before the sun cleared the glass, because I wanted to hear the building breathe before the voices returned. The lobby lights were still soft. The fountain kept its calm little arc. Security looked up, then gave me a small nod that said more than words. I nodded back and crossed the marble at the same pace I always did. The difference lived in the air. People feel it when power moves. By 8, the elevators started spilling out the first wave. Whispers began to move like threads. Heads dipped toward phones, then up again to trace my steps. Some faces held fear. Some held relief. A few carried the clean look of respect. No one laughed. I could hear that silence as clearly as any sound. At the front desk, the receptionist straightened a stack of visitor badges and gave me a quick smile that reached her eyes. Morning, Samantha. Morning. I glanced at the schedule. Make sure you take a real lunch today. If anyone complains, send them to me. Her smile widened. I will. On the executive floor, doors that were usually half shut sat open like they were listening. I walked past Daniel's office. The lights were off. The desk was bare except for a plant someone had forgotten to take home. A faint ring in the carpet marked where his chair had sat for years. It already looked like a placeholder in a museum to a version of the company we were finished with. The CEO arrived 20 minutes later. He slowed when he saw me. For a heartbeat I thought he might speak. He didn't. His eyes dropped to the folder in his hands. He turned away with that stiff carefulness people use when they are trying not to crack. I did not follow. I did not need his eyes to validate what I had done. He had seen enough last night to last a lifetime. By 9, the boardroom filled for a short, unavoidable meeting. No chandeliers. No quartet. Just legal pads and coffee that tasted like sleep. The interim chair called it to order and set the tone in one sentence. We will be factual. We will be steady. Legal summarized the filing status, the regulator notifications, the next steps. Investor relations walked through the plan for calls. No dramatics. We were not performing for an audience anymore. People watched me the way they had not watched me in years. I kept my hand still on the table and answered only when I had something useful to add. A director asked if staff would panic. Not if they see us doing the work, I said. Tell them the truth. Tell them what stays the same. Give them names to contact for what is changing. Then keep our promises. He wrote that down without comment. When the meeting ended, no one rushed the door. It was not that kind of morning. The interim chair stopped beside me. How are you holding up? I have a list, I said. Good, he replied. Work the list. So I did. HR came first. I asked them to draft a clear note to all staff. We discovered fraud. We acted. An independent review is underway. We remain focused on our clients and each other. I made them add something that never makes it into these notes. An email address that goes to people who will answer within the day. Questions deserve replies. Silence breeds stories we cannot manage. Next, finance. We froze specific spending authorizations. We put a second signature on categories that had been treated like personal wallets. We scheduled a full vendor audit that would not become theater. I told them who would run it and who would not. They agreed without pushing back. Everyone knew how we got here. Then I walked. Floors matter. I stopped by the analyst's pit. A few people stood when they saw me. I waved that off and asked what they needed. One said clarity on recurring meetings. Another asked if a client lunch still stood. Yes, I said. And yes. Show up prepared. Their questions will be about us, not the product. Answer only what you know. Then do the work you promised. Near the elevators, a junior who had never said more than hello put a hand out like she might lose her nerve if I took too long to notice. Thank you, she said, voice small, eyes huge. For last night. You're welcome. I meant it. Now take lunch today. And tell your team to do the same. Her laugh came quick and surprised, like she had forgotten it could. Not everyone met me with gratitude. One manager who had laughed loudest at Daniel's jokes tried on a friendly grin he had never used with me before. He talked about how we all knew something was off. I let him finish, then gave him the cleanest version of nothing. People like that do not need to be punished with speeches. They need to be ignored into honesty. At noon, I sat with Ethan in a small conference room that had a view of the parking lot and a plant that was trying its best. He looked tired. He also looked 10 pounds lighter, like he had put down something heavy that had been hitching a ride on his back for months. How bad is the fallout? He asked. Manageable, I said. Because the facts are clean. I slid a list toward him. These are the polls we still need. Do them slow. Double-check every number. If anyone asks what you are working on, tell them you are reconciling vendor histories for the audit. Which is true. He nodded. You slept? A little. Eat. I will. I did not. The afternoon belonged to calls. Clients. Vendors. A regulator who asked focused questions and wrote down every word I said. I kept my answers narrow and accurate. We will cooperate. We have secured relevant records. We will not speculate. The regulator thanked me for my clarity. I hung up and exhaled through my teeth. Precision is a comma. When the day dipped toward evening, the building settled into a different kind of quiet. People worked without the nervous edge that had set their shoulders high in the morning. The receptionist sent me a message at 3:12 that read, "Took lunch." It came with a photo of a sandwich that was too large for its paper. I typed back one word. Victory. Along the way, apologies arrived in soft, awkward shapes. A man from marketing hovered in my doorway and said he was sorry for laughing at the gala. I told him I had heard worse laughs. He flushed and left. A woman from legal said I had done the right thing and then looked at the floor like she was trying not to cry. I told her to take the afternoon and call her mother. She did. Sometimes justice looks like an email sent at the right hour. The CEO kept walking around me like the room was a minefield and I was the one marked in red. Late in the day he paused outside my office. His mouth moved once, then stopped. He settled for a small nod that barely existed. I returned it. That was enough. There are words that cannot be shared in a hallway. There are debts that cannot be cleared in a sentence. At 6, the building thinned. I finally sat back and let the chair hold me. The day had not given me celebration. It had given me weight that I could carry without shaking. That felt better than cake ever could. I never wanted revenge for revenge's sake. Saying it out loud surprised me. It sounded sentimental. It was still true. I did not lie awake at night plotting ways to hurt a man for sport. I wanted a place where work felt like work, not a stage. I wanted dignity to be boring. Being underestimated left me no choice but to become unforgettable. Sometimes the only way people learn to see you is to put your hand on the steering wheel and turn the car yourself. News traveled as news does. By morning, the press had their versions. Some were breathless. Some were smug. Most were half right. The official release did its job. It told the story the way a seatbelt tells a story. It kept people inside the car. Internally, the temperature cooled. Meetings started on time. People put fewer adjectives in emails. A few bad habits died quickly once attention turned toward them. Daniel lost everything that mattered to him. Security escorted him out last night. Today his badge did not open any door. His company card was a dead piece of plastic. His allies stopped returning his messages because allies like that are only heavy coats people drop when the weather changes. Legal will do its work. Regulators will do theirs. I do not need to linger there. That part of the story belongs to the system he exploited. My part belongs to the people who still come in every morning and hold the place together. So I focused on the subtle wins that make a culture. HR moved complaint intake into a ticketed system with tracking that cannot be edited from inside a department. Finance put a living document on the intranet that explains how vendor approvals work in plain words. Facilities fixed the door on the 4th floor that had stuck for a year. The receptionist built a lunch rota so no one sits alone at the desk inhaling crackers while pretending it counts as rest. Ethan trained 2 juniors on reconciliation techniques he had taught himself in the dark. I brought coffee to the night cleaners at 10 and asked which floor needed a second set of eyes that week. They told me the 6th. We walked it together. The list they handed me was better than any consultant's deck I have ever seen. People started stopping me not to praise, but to ask questions that assumed I could answer them. That is a kind of respect I will keep. A client sent a note that read, "Trust is not about never having a problem. It is about what you do when you find one." I printed that and left it on my desk where only I could see it. There were still small knives. An anonymous comment on an internal forum that called me an opportunist. A rumor that I had planned this for months to climb. Those things say more about the people who carry them than the person they try to cut. I let them pass through the air like dull wind. The next week brought the first test of the new spine. A director suggested watering down a report to avoid alarming a partner. I said no. We can order our sentences without softening our facts. He frowned. Then he nodded. After the meeting he told me his daughter had sent him my speech from the gala. I did not need to know that, but he needed to say it. People are learning where to set their weight. Ethan and I kept meeting, now in daylight, doors open, calendars visible. He still looked over his shoulder sometimes. Habit takes time to fade. He asked if I was sleeping better. Some nights, I said. The bad ones are not about fear anymore. They are about lists. He smiled at that and pushed a file toward me. Then here is one more list to keep you honest. The gala found its way into jokes in the cafeteria. Not cruel ones. Human ones. Someone said the dessert that night had been too sweet. Someone else said the best part was when the quartet stopped mid-bow without meaning to. People settled into the story the way people do when an earthquake ends and the aftershocks begin to spread out in time. On my birthday, which was 2 days after the gala, I walked into the office and found a small cake on my desk. No balloons. No crowd. Just a neat white box and a handwritten note that said, "Happy birthday. Thank you for the floor under our feet." It was signed by no one and also by everyone. I cut a slice and took 2 bites and left the rest in the break room with a sticky note that read, "Share." That afternoon, at my desk, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. No preview text. I unlocked the screen. This isn't over. I stared at the words for 3 seconds. Then I took a screenshot, forwarded it to legal with a subject line that said simply, "FYI," and archived the thread. I did not feel fear. I felt the clean alertness of a person who knows storms do not end when you pack away umbrellas. Maybe it isn't over. But this time I will be ready. I closed my laptop at 9 that night. Security was making their rounds. The fountain in the lobby kept doing its polite little arc outside, the air had thinned to the kind of cool that clears the mind. I stood on the steps and looked back through the glass. The building looked like itself. That felt right. Real change often looks ordinary from the sidewalk. The difference lives inside the rooms and in the way people stand when they speak. If you stayed with me through this, thank you. Telling this story is not about reliving the spectacle. It is about remembering the steps. It is about reminding the quiet people who hold places together that they are not small. If you were hooked by this revenge story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share your own story in the comments. I read every single one. And remember, never underestimate the quiet ones.